Hello and welcome to our analysis of iCAT04. iCAT4 is part of our All India National Level CAT test series for CAT 18. With iCAT4, we now entered into the last lap of the CAT package for this year. We'll conduct the analysis for this mock in three parts, one for each section. So before we go into each of the sections, let's first look at the overall difficulty of this mock. As you can see, our experts have classified this as a moderate to tough mock with an average difficulty level of approximately 1.94. Now, what does this 1.94 mean? It implies that if each question is rated from 1 to 3 on a scale of easy to tough, then the average difficulty per question was just below 2 or just below moderate. On the whole, if we look at the actual CAT exam, we see that this value has been seen to be somewhere around 1.9 to 1.95. So broadly, this was quite similar to the actual CAT exam. Let's now have a look at the verbal ability section first. As you can see, this has 34 questions like always, and then the breakup of these 34 is that you have 24 RCs typically split into 5 passages and 10 non-RCs which are generally split into para-summaries, jumbled sentences, etc. So essentially theta questions and some MCQ questions. Here this section had an average LOD of roughly 2.1 and hence it could be classified as a tough section. Again, just to give you a perspective, in the exam typically this value is around 1.85, so this was significantly tougher than the actual exam. Let's analyze the RCs first. When we look at the RCs, we see that in the RCs, typically we have 3 RCs with 6 questions each, and then 2 other RCs with 3 questions each. So this is the most standard breakup which was also followed in this mock. Let's analyze the RCs and see the ones which should have been attempted. Now what this graph really tells us is not only the subject matter of the RCs but also a few other parameters which are helpful in attempting the right RC. Generally, when we sit down to attempt an RC in a CAT mock, we look primarily at the subject matter. However, in the exam, we should be looking not only at the subject matter for our comfort level or for our ease of understanding, but we should also be looking at the number of questions associated with that passage, as well as the length or the word count of that passage. So, of course, you cannot really calculate the word count for every RC, but broadly, whether it is short, long, etc., in that sense. So when we look at these RCs here, firstly we observe, as we said, that broadly the section itself was at an LOD of 2.1, which is fairly high, and that again reflects in the fact that none of the RCs had an LOD less than 2, which means there was no RC here which which could have been called easy or easy to moderate. Every RC was either moderate or moderate to tough. So which are the RCs that should have been tried? Now please keep in mind that even though we might typically say that you should try and attempt anywhere around 15-16 questions in the actual RCs, this is not a number that needs to be followed all the time. If the RCs are tougher, your attempts can definitely go down. Here when I look at these RCs, observe that 2 passages here, the one on philosophical reform and this one on philosophical reform and this one on Midsummer Night's Dream were the 2 longest passages which were more like an IFT length. Also, these were the toughest passages of the entire mock with questions ranging from moderate to tough. Yes, there were 6 questions in both these passages, but at the same time, when I look at the topics, philosophy, again, literature and more of a classic, when I look at the word length and the difficulty level, I would say that definitely these two were ones that I would not try in the exam. Whereas if I were to look at the other RCs, again here the topics are tough, but the questions seem to be on the easier side with an average LOD of 2. Also these RCs are shorter. So here when I look at all these RCs, my approach really would be to not attempt any one RC completely or not really focus on any one RC in totality as a rule. Considering these 3 passages which are 6 plus 3 plus 3 questions and also these 2 which are again 6 questions, and you might think I'm contradicting myself by saying don't attempt these and now saying consider them. What I'm doing is putting them right at the end. I would try and scrape the barrel for any question that I can attempt in these RCs. So here, for instance, let's say when I consider this passage on extraterrestrial life, let's say out of these 6 questions, even if I'm able to solve 3 questions, that's okay. In these 2 passages, if I'm able to solve even say 1 or 2 questions here, or let's say 4 questions here and one question here, that's again okay. In these 2 out of these 12, even if I'm able to solve 3 questions, that's fine. So sometimes in RCs, you might have to follow this strategy where instead of trying to solve one RC in totality, you try and attempt only those questions that you are comfortable with. This is the big difference between say an RC passage and a DILR set. In a DILR set, very often it happens that you might not be able to solve a single question if you've not done the first question well. Whereas in an RC, you can skip the first 5 questions and only solve the 6th question. That's absolutely fine. So here it's a matter of searching for the right question within the passage and then answering them. So on the whole, in this particular mock, if you were to ask me, I would say rather than focusing on the number of RCs to be attempted, I would focus on answering the doable questions wherever possible, and I would try to achieve anywhere close to 8 to 9 attempts in the RCs. 8 to 9 attempts in the RCs so as to try and clear the cutoff. Please note that the sectional cutoff for this verbal section would be fairly low. Let's now have a look at the non-RC questions. As you can see here, this had the standard breakup, which was 4 jumbled sentences, 3 contextual odd man out questions and 3 para summaries. The para summaries since the last 2 years have been MCQs, so that was followed. Whereas these 2 were both numerical entry questions. As we can see here, the jumbled sentences were on the moderate to tough side. Now, without options, it becomes extremely difficult to mark the correct answer for jumbled sentences. And that is where the number of correct attempts go down. Though contextual odd man out questions are slightly tougher compared to jumbled sentences because you need to first arrange the questions in a paragraph and then find the sentence which does not fit into the passage. These were easy. Similarly, the para summaries, which are the MCQs, were reasonably moderate. Keep in mind that because they are MCQs, negative marking does apply. So you need to keep these 2-3 points in mind before you answer the questions. However, having said that, it was possible to attempt anywhere close to 4 questions from the non-RC part. Now, what do I mean when I say attempt 4 questions? Please keep in mind that in the non-MCQ questions or in the TETA questions, we often recommend that the student should mark every single answer or should answer every single question. But that does not mean that you are yourself confident of your answer. So the 4 questions that I mentioned here are those where the student is fairly confident about the accuracy of his answers. So here when I combine these 2 attempts, 13 attempts would be a reasonably good performance as far as clearing the sectional cutoff for this particular section is concerned. Let's look at the next graph in this particular analysis, and this is something which we'll show you for each section. Essentially, this maps the difficulty level of the questions from question 1 to 34. The blue lines or the blue bars indicate the MCQs, while the orange or pink ones indicate the numerical entry or TETA questions. So the first thing that you observe is that the RCs do not have a single easy question. All the questions are either moderate or tough. So there are RCs like philosophical reform, which have 2 tough questions and 4 moderate questions. Similarly, the one on Midsummer Night's Dream has 2 tough questions up front and then 4 moderate questions. The one on Extraterrestrial Life has 1 tough question, but the rest are moderate, so more attempts possible here. Whereas the other 2 passages had only moderate questions, but these topics were on the tougher side, so this increases the difficulty. On the other hand, when I compare the non-MCQ questions, the contextual odd man out were easy here, whereas the jumbled sentences were either moderate or tough, and the para summary were just about moderate. So here question selection within the non-MCQs was extremely important. Let's have a look at one passage very quickly. So when I look at this last passage, it starts from this point, the scientific search for extraterrestrial life, and then it describes this entire search. So it ends here. Now if you see, the questions here are more or less standard as what you would see in your practice RCs. What would be the most suitable title for this passage? So here of course you need to read the whole passage, understand the gist, and then arrive at a title. Then when I look at the other questions, what does the passage deal with? What is the tone of the author? When we say the author writes in a manner that is, then we would say that what's the tone of the author? Which of these would the author most agree with? Which of the following finds no mention? So now this question 33 is something which is a purely factual question, because when we say something finds no mention in the passage, there will be 3 options which are mentioned in the passage. So you can always go to the passage, find those 3 points and exclude them as answers. The 1 point that is not mentioned is your answer. So here again you do not need to answer all the questions, but if you smartly answer even 3 or 4, that is more or less enough. For RCs, we typically recommend that you first read the passage very quickly for a basic understanding. Then go to the questions, look at all the questions briefly so that you know more or less what is the kind of data that's asked. And then go and read the passage again in greater detail so that you are able to answer the questions quickly. Overall, to summarize, this was a tough verbal section in a moderate to tough mock. So 13 attempts would be a good performance for this section. In parts 2 and 3 of this analysis, we will discuss the DILR and quant sections respectively. The analysis for all our previous mocks are available on our official YouTube channel as given in the link here. You can click on the link to subscribe to our channel. Also, to get notifications every time a new video is put up, you need to hit the bell button. Feel free to put in your comments, feedback or questions on the thread below the video. Keep watching. Thank you and wish you all the very best.